So I'm so excited to be finally doing a moon themed painting class. And so as we go through, I'm going to show you a few different techniques and a few different supplies and materials. And so the first thing that I want to share with you, and maybe some of you have already seen it, is wood icing. It's textura paste. And it's similar to a modeling paste, except for that it's instead of being drying clear and plasticky, it dries sort of a buff color and more like a matte, I don't really know how to explain it, more like a matte finish and more like a wood texture. So this is what I use when I'm doing my textured moon paintings. And so I want to give you a little lesson in wood icing before we get started with actual any imagery or anything like that. So again, this is the consistency of creamy peanut butter, and you want to spread it on your substrate using a palette knife or spatula or something like that. I like the bigger, wider palette knives as opposed to like the little pointy ones. Of course, the little pointy ones will work, but they won't spread as nicely because it's almost like you're going to be icing a cake. Okay, hence the name wood icing. So the cool thing about this is that you can use this on pretty much any surface. You don't really want to use it on paper because it's pretty heavy, and but you can use it on cardboard. You can use it on canvas panels. Here I have a couple wood stamp mounts, and these are great for doing small little pieces of art, or also just for practicing. You can use like your ampersand wood panels. Now you can use it on like clay board or gesso board and things like that, but I don't recommend it because those are already primed with a certain kind of surface, and so you don't necessarily want to coat those surfaces with the wood icing, although it would work. But you're paying for gesso board or clay board, so if you do use a wood panel like this, and of course I love ampersand, but if you choose to do a panel, then I would either use the plain birch panels like this, or just the wood smooth panels. Okay, so I'm just showing you a variety of stuff that you can use on here. We have a stretched canvas, and that will work very nicely with the wood icing as well, although of course you're going to get a completely different texture than your canvas texture once you cover it up. And then here I do have a piece of gesso board. Like I said, that would work just fine, but I wouldn't choose to cover this surface up. You can also use things like an old cigar box, and you could even use the cardboard ones, but these wood ones would make a great surface for the wood icing. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to smooth some on and show you kind of what you can do on it. You're going to just take your wood icing, and you can be pretty generous with it, but I'd rather work in layers and do thin layers at a time. So like maybe ice it on here and do some stamping into it or carving into it as it is still workable, but then you could let it dry and layer over the top again if you want it thicker. Because if you do it too thick, as it dries, it will start to crack. That's not always a bad thing. Sometimes you might want that crackle effect, but if you don't, then you just don't want to work with it too thick. One thing you want to keep in mind as you're working is keep some paper towels and some baby wipes handy, because you want to clean off your tools right away. You don't want the wood icing drying on anything that's important to you. It will ruin it and be really hard to get off. So you can keep smoothing it if you want to. One of the things that's nice about it though is to get little imperfections and little bubbles, especially when we're doing the moon paintings. All those little craters I actually want. Okay, so now again we're going to clean this off really well. I'm going to use a baby wipe to make sure that my palette knife is free from all that wood icing on there. And always keep your wood icing covered as well, because you don't want it drying out, and it will pretty quick if you don't keep it covered. Okay, so now this is still pretty wet, okay? So there's a point, and once you work with it a little bit, you'll start to recognize when you should stamp into it, when you should carve into it. Right now, if I take any kind of tool and I begin to carve in it, it's still pretty wet, so it might not hold the lines quite as well as I'd like. So I'm going to let that just set up for a minute or two, and I'm going to take this other little stamp mount and show you also how you can use a stencil right over the top. So I just want this little portion of the stencil. So I'm going to just smooth that over and then gently lift it away, and then you'll have your pattern on there. I hope you can see that pretty well. Again, with your stencils, you want to clean it off really quickly. And you can always just, you know, if you have a little tub of water handy, you could always just drop your stencils into there. But since I was just using such a small one, cleaning it off that way was fine. And I don't know if you can see this, but here I have a little bit of an imperfection that I don't want on there, so I can just scrape that right away. And then later I'll work with that some more. I'm going back over here to this one, and now is when I can take some lids, maybe to, oh, here's a lid to my Mod Podge, and I can use that to make a circle. Give it a little twist. It's still pretty wet, but you can see it made a little impression in my wood icing there. And I can also take some rubber stamps or some other different size lids if I just want to do circles. But here I have a little star stamp, and I can just make some texture right in there. Again, clean off your stamps right away. I will also even take an old toothbrush and clean all that out right away. Now, this was, again, was still a little bit wetter than I'd like, and so my stars, it kind of didn't make the best impression. This is where you'll want to experiment and just be patient. Certain areas are thicker and still a little bit more wet. I don't know if you can see up close, but like some of those stars got really mushed a little bit. They'll still look great, but then some over here on the side gave a nice clear impression. So I'm just gonna do it again on a couple spots. And then you know, just play around with some of the imagery. So here I just have a couple circle stamps, and I'm adding a little bit more texture. So I'm going to let that dry, and we can begin painting it. Here I have a large one on a wood panel that I've already done, where I spread my wood icing. I chose different stamps. I had a big lid to something, and I made my circle, I had a smaller lid. I made this circle, and then I used various rubber stamps to get some stars and some little texture so I could have my space or universe theme. And so we'll get started painting on this right away, but I wanted to share with you how I went about using and applying the wood icing.